Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of DailyDead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James, and I'm joined today by Bryan Christopher, Derek Anderson, and Scott Drebit. This is part 2 of our listener mailbag. If you were here for last episode, you know that we did not make it very far at all. We got 4 questions in, and I think we were an hour and a half in. I'm like, we need to split this into 2 parts because so many people sent us questions. So we're going to tackle more questions this time. Maybe about the same amount, but at least we'll get through them. And we're going to do what we did last time and ask around the room and get everybody's thoughts. And we're going to start with a question from Jordan, who asks, what horror character or personality did you look up to growing up? Essentially, who is your horror hero? And let's start with you, Scott. Scott, who was your horror hero?
My horror hero, and thank you for the question, Jordan. Bryan and I might be the same on this, but I don't know. I get to go first. Anyway, so I saw Phantasm when I was 10, and from that moment on, I was completely mesmerized by Angus Scrimm's portrayal of the tall man. So I know it's basic, as the kids say, but I don't care. It's who I am, and Angus Scrimm forever.
So you were not horrified of the tall man? You were more in awe of the tall man?
It's a mixture, right? Especially the first time you see it, where it was probably more straight fear, and then each subsequent viewing would be more and more about admiration and appreciation of the talent, you know?
And I think there's also something to be said about the fact that once you learn what a just genuinely sweet man Angus Scrimm was in real life,
it stops it, right?
Yeah, and it's not that it takes anything away from the movie. It's not that it takes anything away from the performance, but there's just a little dash of something else, like kind of imbued into that performance when you know the man giving it is just the antithesis of the character. But yeah, like I can get that too, how it's like he's this terrifying being, but I mean, there's also an element, well, of course, literally you have to look up to him. But there's just, I don't know, like if you're looking at it through the lens of just, you know, kind of the tall man as death itself and kind of having to get through the process of grief and just kind of him being that avatar, then death is something that is just a part of life. So it's, I don't know. I think there's something to that idea of it's not necessarily just like kind of fear and revulsion. There's also something compelling about him.
Hear, hear.
See, I was like the ice cream man too, because he had the ice cream treats and he could sing. And
I'm sorry. Did you just refer to Reggie
he did.
as the ice cream man?
Throw some respect on his name, okay?
It's like a nickname, though. It's affectionate. Like,
Nope.
I mean,
Nope. Nope.
Oh,
his
come on.
His name is Reggie the Ice Cream Man.
Oh.
Not Ice Cream Man, not Creamy, not Man, not Ice.
Like he's not a superhero whose like, you know, weakness is a hot summer sun.
Well, he is kind of.
His name is Reggie.
But it's like, I feel like it's iconic, right? It's like his weapon is his
ice
ingenuity and ice cream truck. It's like
and
hand
his
in hand.
4-barrel shotgun.
It's not his
like,
ice
All
cream.
that too.
What are you doing, man? You're killing me here.
Oh no.
Show's ruined.
It's embarrassing.
That's funny.
Well, I mean, since we're in the realm of Phantasm, and I thought Scott was going to wind up taking mine, but I'm in the same movie, but I'm with a different character, and I'm also not. I'm not talking about Reggie, even though I just kind of, you know, had a fit over the idea of someone not calling him by his name. In terms of the person that I connected with the idea of really looking up to, that goes to Jodie, because I think that relationship is the core of what drew me to this film series in the first place, even for a long time without me really knowing it. Just as someone who grew up with a single dad from a young age, who kind of went out of his way to kind of have more of like an older brother vibe, I really connected with that relationship between Mike and Jodie in the film. And I think Bill Thornberry, I hope I'm saying that accurately after all that crap I just gave Derek about naming people. I just think he's so perfect in that role. And it's interesting because I don't know him, I don't know if he's done any other role besides Jodie. So for me, he's Jodie. And in that first movie, he really plays it well in terms of, you can tell he genuinely cares for Mike. You can also tell that like he wants to be anywhere but that town, and kind of that push and pull between that fear that Mike has of abandonment is something that kind of permeates the whole movie. And it's something that I know I was kind of desperately low-key scared of all the time. Kind of when you're living with a single parent, there's always that fear in the back of your head of like, what happens when that parent isn't there anymore? Or what happens if something happens to that parent? So it was definitely something where, kind of seeing that play out on screen was something that was very meaningful for me. And so, there's a lot of reasons to love Phantasm. But I think for me that the core of it was Mike's relationship with his older brother, Jodie.
Yeah, I have two older brothers as well. So that relationship, of course, really resonates with me as well. And we'll be right back after these messages with Phantasm. Our 12-hour discussion on the first movie.
I'm loving it.
Series.
I feel like the question was, what character from the Phantasm series did you look up to, right?
Yes.
That was the question. Yeah.
I feel like I need to go in that direction, but I'm scared to after.
You're going to say Ice Cream Man.
After a term of endearment apparently was not received as such. So I guess I would go, this may come as no surprise, but to me, when I was growing up specifically, I would say R.L. Stine was my...
he wasn't in Phantasm, Derek.
Well, just pretend. Let's pretend he was under the hood of one
Wasn't
of the...
Slappy in Phantasm?
Right. I mean, who knows? It could have been one of the minions of the Tall Man. We don't know for sure. But to me, that was... And if you listen to part one of our listener mailbag episode, you'll know that my dream is to have like a Truffaut, Hitchcock, like 1 week interview sit down with R.L. Stine.
Restraining order.
Locked in his basement.
But I mean, the guy, I can't help it though. The guy was everywhere in the 90s, and it wasn't just the books either. It was the original Goosebumps TV series was so big. I remember like I was taking swimming lessons probably to avoid any Are You Afraid of the Dark swimming pool raft situations. So I was also scared to go in the pool for that reason. But so I would go to swim lessons on Saturday mornings, and I had to tape Goosebumps, the TV series, because it was like originally airing at that time. And that was like my treat when I would get home, is I'd get to watch Goosebumps. And so I was reading the books, I was watching the TV show, and it was so cool how like in the opening of the TV show, like Stein like walks onto the hill and his suitcase opens and all the pages fly out and the demonic dog is on the front porch and everything. But it was just, I just thought it was so cool that like this guy was behind so many of my favorite stories. And it was like I was like, oh, I want to be like that guy. Like that was a really early role model for me as far as just creating content that really like connected with people. And that was like my whole world at the time as far as like scary stories, because I hadn't really graduated to Fear Street or slasher movies or anything else. Like that was my horror world in the 90s was R.L. Stine, until I kind of moved on into Shady Side for the Fear Street stories. So I would probably go with R.L. Stine on that one.
Yeah, I had a feeling you would, based on last episode.
How did you know?
You don't want to rethink that, Derek, or is that your final answer?
I mean, if you had to twist my arm and say a movie character, I think I would go Dr. Loomis. That would be my.
I thought he went by like serial killer, chaser, or psychiatrist. Isn't that his name in the movie?
Let's show some respect to the doctor.
I thought it was horror villain. I thought the question was horror villain. Was that not the question?
It's horror personality or character.
Did you look up to growing up?
Okay. Because I thought it was horror villain, but I mean, it would have been. I would have said Angus Scrim anyway.
Yeah.
But then Brian started talking about Jody, and I'm thinking, well, he's not the villain, but we get to talk about Phantasm. Right. But we get to talk about Phantasm.
So all's good. Yeah.
Let's see how far we can keep this ball going.
It's all how
we
you
all
look
paid
at
attention to the question, Scott. So.
Jordan, you're getting multiple viewpoints on your question. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
That's how we got through so many questions the last time.
Yeah. So for my horror hero or personality, I'm torn. I have two answers
or villain
or villain, right? Because it could be villain. I mean, there are a couple of obvious ones if you know me, but like the first one's got to be Ripley, right? So I mean, all I did was watch Alien and Aliens, and you know, I mean, I think there's a lot of great things about Ripley. You know, she was smart enough to know to keep quarantine. You know, stay inside when things are looking bad. And so that came back to, so she gave me a good life lesson that would be helpful in 2020. So thank you, Ripley. And
nice.
But I mean, I
think I know the other. I think I know another one.
Interesting. But yeah, so just an example of, you know, just a kick-ass character, a kick-ass female, and you know, and it's also, you know, it's something great that I like. The evolution of the character. Certainly I like the evolution of the character between Alien and Aliens. Alien 3, you know, it's not so much, but I didn't watch Alien 3 till a little bit later. And so anyway, so for me, it was definitely like the first two Alien movies. I'm like, I can't wait to see what Ripley does. Oh.
Well, I do think there's something to the fact that like in Ripley, you actually kind of get multiple heroes because the iterations of her are kind of different from movie to movie. You know, there's a lot of people that appreciate the original because Ripley is a woman who being a woman isn't the only thing that defines her character. In fact, the character was written originally as a man.
Yeah.
So, you know, she's just kind of one of the crew. And they, you know, not to say that they kind of shy away from her being a woman or anything like that, but it's not kind of a defining trait. Things do take a bit of a turn in Aliens, and you know, I've heard some different takes on, you know, in some ways people really appreciate kind of like the ferocity that comes out of her when she's protecting Newt, you know, get away from her, you bitch, all that classic stuff. But there are some conversations that, you know, people are more compelled by the original iteration in the original Alien because it's not tied to that notion of motherhood or even surrogate motherhood. You know, she's important and she is a compelling character without having to be tied to what, you know, can be seen as an overdone trope. Faculty of Horror actually has a really good discussion on this in a double feature they have on Alien and Aliens. And it kind of, you know, it gave some really interesting perspective on kind of how you can interpret the first iteration of Ripley and the iteration in Aliens. But if you do kind of keep going down that list, you kind of get with Alien 3, while it's certainly not a lot of people's favorite movie, you definitely get an even different flavor of Ripley. It's kind of more of like a gothy emo version of just like, because it's just such a dark movie and she's just in such a dark place. You know, she's a very different character there. And
it's the Lollapalooza.
Yeah. It's the grunge Ripley, you know, early 90s. Yeah. And then in Alien Resurrection, which, if you can plug your ears for this, Scott or Jonathan, because I know you don't want to have anything to do with it.
I really like her in this one.
I like Alien Resurrection. I'll just say it. I'll put it out there. I like that movie, and I like her as kind of almost like she's almost veering into anti-hero territory here. It's a very different Ripley. It basically isn't Ripley because it's a clone at this point. But she just gets to have a fun with it this time that she didn't necessarily get to have in earlier films. So I like kind of all different iterations of Ripley, and I think each one has something interesting to offer.
Yeah, I mean, as we've heard before, I like 3. I wish that 3 didn't exist, but I like it as a film by itself.
Wow.
But 4,
why you wish it didn't exist?
I mean, I definitely wish we got an actual sequel to Aliens, and that we didn't wipe out Newt and Hicks in the first, few minutes.
I get what you're
Maybe
saying.
a trade-off. We could get rid of Newt and keep Hicks.
Or they could morph together and we get Nicks. So
there you go.
That
Stevie
could be
Nicks.
it too.
Yeah, I thought you meant like Fleetwood Mac was going to
yeah. But yeah, and then I want to like Alien Resurrection. I've softened over the last few years. Like movies that I didn't like, I'm watching again. I'm like, I like those movies more. So I don't know if Alien Resurrection is going to be that for me, but I haven't been able to get into it.
You want to believe.
This reminds me when I was 13 years old, and I just moved to this new school, new country, and there's this beautiful girl in my grade called Susie Snisky, and she was from the States, and I really liked her, and I was friends with her friend, and I kept asking her, well, does she like me? And she'd go, well, she's trying to like you.
Oh my God.
So, same kind of, I feel, same kind of scenario.
Yeah, I'm trying to like Alien Resurrection. I feel like
in the work.
Yeah.
Spoiler. She never did.
I kind of figured. And then my other one, which I can talk about quickly, my other horror hero is Stephen King. It's like, it's...
Sorry, yeah. What I was saying earlier quickly, I was thinking you were going to pick Peter Cushing.
And Peter Cushing would have been a good one. But at least in I'm going back to like my grade school years. Grade school, Jonathan would watch movies with Peter Cushing, but I didn't watch enough of them where I was was picking out like individual actors and seeking them out, and then kind of like going into like the deeper cuts. Like
right.
That was more in high school as I was watching and then hunting for those Dracula movies. I realized just how many Hammer movies there were as well. But yeah, it was Stephen King, because that just kind of really opened my eyes to, like, I didn't like reading a lot back then, so it really kind of got me into reading. And when I found out that there was more than whatever books they were trying to get me to read at the time that I didn't like, and so I could read a Stephen King book a day, and that's how much time I spent reading when I was in grade school, and just tried to get through as many of them as possible. And that stuff just really blew my mind back in the day. There's just somebody so creative that can come up with so many different ideas, and kind of blow my mind each time. So, and it was obviously the very adult material for grade schoolers. So I was like, should I be reading this? Huh. But yeah, definitely one of my horror heroes.
That's awesome.
And just a hint, we're probably going to wind up coming back to him in a later question.
Ooh.
Oh, actually, I can guarantee we're going to come back to him in a later question.
I don't know the questions.
Where are your cue cards?
We'll catch you up later.
My secret is out.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna, and this is why Scott's going first for all these. So we're gonna move on to our next question, which is from Brianna, who asks, "Do you have a favorite article you've written?" And Scott, I mean, do you got one ready to go? I can ask other people, but if you're good to go, what's your favorite article that you've written?
Scott doesn't remember the articles that he's written.
I don't. It's true. The dust off that I did on Phantasm, I really like. There's some of the dust-offs I really like. But, you know, I did a piece once in defense of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, that I still really like. And it's kind of apart from, you know, everything else, just a nice little editorial. I really like that one. But, you know, there's a bunch. And there's a bunch that are garbage too, but that's my cross to bear.
Don't listen to them. There are none that are garbage.
They're all gooders. They're all gooders in our book.
The interesting thing for me and Scott's work is that, like, it's hard for me to pick one out because, especially with the dust-offs, it seems like it's one like 300 or almost 300 part conversation that's just kind of ongoing. So it's all like, you could put all these together and it would make for a very interesting book of essays or something like that. And for me, it's just kind of like, it's the whole body of work. And I don't mean that as like a cop out, because like I can't remember anyone that stands out. It's legitimately like everything that Scott puts out is just distinctively in his voice and is so Scott that there's nothing that necessarily stands out, because it's all just like, it's all him, and it's all in that voice, and it's all why I keep going back to it. Now, that being said, I think the thing that I'm most proud of you as is that damn Christmas Evil poem that you did, because that was just,
oh yeah,
that was definitely came to mind.
Yeah. Oh well, yeah.
Geez, I'm going to cry over here. Thanks, Brianna, for the question. You got you know, it's funny, but sometimes when you write stuff, one that you don't necessarily like, that you've written, or you think it's just okay, you'll go back and it's actually really good. And then there's other ones that you're really keen on and don't seem to land. So it's just such a crapshoot, you know. It totally is. And I think we're all really good writers here, and I'm proud of everything that's written on Daily Dead. Everything.
Oh.
Well, it's true though.
Hear, hear.
What was the question?
We're still on topic.
We're still on topic.
Article. We're right on topic. So Brian, how about you? I know you kind of talked already.
Sure. So I think the thing I'm most proud of that comes to mind recently is one that I can't take a lot of credit for. It was an interview that I did with Sam Weinman for Let's Scare Brian to Death about Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker. And it was just such a fun conversation. And it was, first of all, it was a movie that kind of completely took me by surprise in terms of how much I liked it, and how in a lot of the discussions it was having, it was way ahead of its time in the way it was depicting gay characters and sexuality, and the way people treat gay characters and gay people. And it was kind of one of those things where, like, putting together the interview was such an easy task because the discussion just kind of went to these really interesting places. And so I credit most of that to Sam Weinman. But, you know, I'll pat myself on the back a little bit in terms of kind of getting the ball rolling on having the conversation, giving him the kind of the microphone to be able to talk about that movie. Yeah, I think I polished it up into a pretty nice little interview. So yeah, I think that's the favorite thing that I can think of in recent memory.
You know, now it's my turn, because what I love about Brian and his stuff is Brian is an idea man. Brian is a hustler. Brian's got like 7 different columns all over the internet, with a lot of pies at home base, Daily Dead, of course. And the ideas are just these wonderful, like, let's scare Brian to death. What an amazing idea for a column.
Mm-hmm.
My God, so much other stuff. But anytime a new Bryan column comes up, and I go, shit, why didn't I think of that? So I'm just fortunate that I get to collaborate with Egghead over here.
It's Melonhead. Okay, that was my nickname as a kid because I do have a very large head.
Melonhead.
But
Oh.
that said, I
Chuck,
do.
don't worry about it.
I'm gonna kick the football now. No, I appreciate that, Scott. That really means a lot because it's. I'm so afraid when I start to have these kinds of conversations, it could come off as cliche, but like, you are a huge kind of inspiration for me in terms of getting into this. And so the fact that, you appreciate my work just kind of, hits that fanboy geek button in me that it makes me blush. So I do appreciate that.
We are getting verklempt. We are, for real. Derek, say something.
Well, I was going to say that what I love about your columns, Bryan, is that I always learn something new, because a lot of times you're shedding light on movies that may not be the most popular or I haven't seen, or even if I have seen them, like with Let's Scare Bryan to Death, you're talking with someone who has a totally unique viewpoint on them. So it makes you appreciate them in new ways and really kind of makes you look at them differently than you might have from your own perspective. So I love that. And the catalog from the Beyond is awesome, has been awesome as well, because it's stuff that I might not necessarily know about. I mean, I've learned of a couple of things from that column. Like I really want to watch Beyond the Garden Wall now after reading
Over
that.
the Garden Wall.
Or Over the Garden Wall. No
It's
wonder
so
I can't
good.
find it.
It's so good.
You went too far. You went past the
Yeah,
garden.
you just gotta go over it, not beyond it.
I went beyond the catalog from the Beyond. And then there was the one with it's totally blanking. Viggo Mortensen was in it. And
History of
History
Violence.
of Violence, or Passion of Darkly Noon, the one
Yes,
with Brendan
Passion.
Fraser. Oh God, that movie is something else, man.
So, I mean, stuff like that. I mean, you bring such a unique sensibility to it, and it's really been awesome to see that over, gosh, it's been years now that you've been writing for us. It's just been so cool to watch. Like, I feel like you are kind of the unsung hero. You're bringing all these different perspectives and broadening our community and doing a damn good job of it at the same time.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing too is that, for our listeners, obviously we have some of our fellow writers, listening, and they know all the blood, sweat, and tears that you guys are putting into these columns and articles. But a lot of people may not realize that for Let's Scare Bryan to Death, Bryan spends a lot of time looking for the right guest. He's got to reach out to them. He's got to see how schedules work, coordinate everything for that, decide on a movie, discuss and record and transcribe, and there's a lot of there's a lot of time and effort that goes into these.
I hate transcribing so much. It's the worst thing in the world. Like,
it is to die for.
I gotta come up with a better system, because I don't know, like the discussions go into these great places, and it's kind of where I get the goal, but it's just like, the transcribing is death.
You are in hell.
The first time I transcribed, the first interview I had was with, I think it's Liam O'Donnell. I hope I'm not messing his name up, for Skyline. And we did a postmortem on Skyline, and I transcribed every word because I didn't know better. And I transcribed every word and every line and exactly as he said it. And I didn't realize that, you can take you can take clips, and it's okay to remove ums and likes, and shortening's okay. I didn't know that. I spent days transcribing that thing, and I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So
that's what I did with Adrian King too. It was I would listen to one sentence, pause, and write that down.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, this is great. It's only an hour conversation.
I will say there's nothing to completely take away the pain of doing transcribing, but I do need to credit Rue Morgue editor Andrea Subasati with doing something that has saved me so much time with this process. And so if you have a recording and you need to transcribe it, if you have some kind of a function, either if you have Word or some kind of a processor, whatever you use, if it has a dictation feature, if you get headphones going, listen to the interview and kind of whisper it into a microphone along with it. Dictation has gotten pretty good nowadays, so it will give you at least a rough kind of sketch of what is being said, and then kind of all you need to do is go through and polish it and figure out, like, because there's going to be certain spots where you like it interpreted as the wrong thing, or maybe you mumbled a little bit. It's still like transcribing is still the seventh circle of hell, but you kind of get closer to the sixth circle with this process, just because it does make things run a lot faster than just simply listening and typing as you go, pausing, going back when you didn't quite catch up with something. It just at least makes things flow a little bit better.
Yeah, that's helpful. There's definitely some things that can help automate it, but they're never 100%. So there's always that like human element, at least for now. But that's a cool tip.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Andrea, wasn't it Brianna?
No, that was.
I'm behind again, guys.
So now, Derek, we'll move on to you. Favorite article you've written?
Wow, great question, Brianna. It's been fun to go down memory lane with this one. There's so many to choose from. I think for me, it's kind of a tie, so I'm going to cheat. I've got a couple different layers here. So I would say probably the one that sticks out in my mind the most when I think about like interviews would be back in 2014, I interviewed Tom Savini over the phone to talk specifically about directing 1990's Night of the Living Dead remake. And it was he was like going to be at a horror con somewhere. And so it wasn't like a publicist directly connecting us. And it was kind of like, okay, call Tom at this time and you can talk, about making the movie. So the day arrives and I call Tom and I don't get an answer. And then I'm like, oh no, I wonder if I have the right number. So I call back, no answer, call back again. And Tom answers and he's very pleasant and he's like, and who is this? And I'm like, oh, it's me. We had this, I wanted to talk about Night of the Living Dead. And he's like, yeah, of course. He's like, I was just wondering, like, who's calling me from Minnesota? Like, is this a telemarketer? Like, why is this Minnesota person calling me? And he was helping a friend move that day. So he took time out of his day helping his friend move. And we started having this great conversation about the movie. And it's really a lot of stuff I had never heard before. He was really candid about it, about he had a lot of interesting times making that movie. I think he did a lot of great work with it, but he also had frustrations with kind of the final cut, and he was very open and unfiltered about it, which was really refreshing. And then the X factor, though, is that the service, like on our lines, started to get bad. If I stood in certain parts of the room, the signal was better. And so there was times where I think the call actually dropped at one point and I had to call him back. And then after that point, I'm just like crouching around my bedroom, like trying to get the best angle so our reception is good. So I'm literally like, I'm standing on top of the bed. I'm like going over into the corner. I'm like chasing the signal of the phone so that it doesn't cut out again. And so that was just a total whirlwind, but it was such a joy. And I felt it was just awesome. He was awesome to talk with, but I always remember that interview for just being very unique.
There's so many interview horror stories, and it's like the more you have, like the more interviews that you take on, the more chances you have to screw it up. I've had where they've hung up on me, I've hung up on them, the connection's bad, we get the times wrong. I call them and they forgot about the interview. That's happened. I mean, I forgot to hit the record button. I had my recorder die in the middle of an interview, and luckily I didn't have a backup that time, so I had to get somebody else's. Thankfully, it was a round table. And then now I always carry a backup recorder in case my main dies. I mean, you shouldn't have to deal with this.
But when you say hang up, this is what I want to get back to. When you hang up on them or they've hung up on you, like intentionally hang up,
No, not intentionally.
Yeah,
It's
this
like
interview is over.
yeah, we're done here. I don't like your answers.
You're saying to the subject.
Yeah, I don't like your answers anymore. Boom. Done.
I'm looking for some dirt.
No, just the line,
I'm
cuts
lonely.
out. The call is dropped.
You're getting the scoop. So that was definitely like the most, and that was my first year at Daily Dead. I'd only been with Daily Dead for like 6 or 7 months at that point. So I was really just trying not to mess anything up. And so the fact that I was like really hoping to like not get cut off with the signal was stressful, but exciting. On the news side of things, I would say going back to 2016, I was talking with Lynn Shay about a movie she was in called Abattoir. And towards the end of the interview, this was like before the 4th Insidious movie came out. I believe it's called The Last Key. And I wanted to ask her about that movie so I could see if any information I could get, any juicy details on it, that kind of thing. And so I kind of asked her, like anything you can tell me about it, kind of expecting like maybe nothing, I can't talk about it, that kind of thing. But then she gave me this wonderful, like, all these wonderful details about what the story was going to be about, what to expect with the script, what Lee Winnell had been, how he had been crafting the story. And it was like all this great information. And I hung up after the call was over, put the phone down, and then I'm like, I don't think that's been anywhere else. So I like went on Wikipedia and I'm looking around. I couldn't find it anywhere else. So I'm like, I think that's actually like new information. So I was like in beat reporter mode. I like started frantically grabbing like the audio and transcribing the last like 3 or 4 minutes. And I'm like, and then I'm triple checking to make sure it was a real exclusive and everything like that. And so I'm just running around the house, just trying to get this out. And then I finally get this post out and I'm like, I think it worked. And then like by the end of that day, Entertainment Weekly had run an article like referencing Daily Dead. And I thought that was like the coolest thing, because I had been waiting to do something like that since I joined the site. And it was like, oh, we got some street cred with some of the other sites on that one. So that was like a cool, I felt like a chain smoking beat reporter at that moment. Like,
That's awesome.
Listen,
see, we got
Minneapolis
Lynn
gets the scoop.
Shay. Yeah, we got Lynn Shay. See, I got a real scoop from Lynn Shay.
No, that scoop game is so tough, man.
Yeah, and I was really into I was really on like the scoop center on then. Like that was my big focus, was to like, crack a story and that kind of thing. So it felt good to like get one,
I'm so glad that I don't have to worry about that. Like most of the stuff I talk about has been out for years. It just like I can't imagine the blood pressure issues I would be having if I was trying to keep ahead of the just infinite number of other horror outlets out there in terms of trying to get to stuff first. So like you are a braver man than I, Derek. And beyond that, I think what I love about your stuff is that you bring just kind of this unabashed, earnest joy to the horror genre. Like everything you talk about is just coming from this level of sincerity that I love. And you're kind of that guy who, like, I feed off of other people's enthusiasm. Like I love to hear people talk about things they're passionate about. And so, especially if it's something that I wouldn't normally be into myself. So like the fact that you've got my interest peaked on DComs is something that like, I appreciate that, because like, it's not something that is that's no easy feat. And I won't say I've waded too deeply into the world of DComs, but I did dip my toe in a couple months ago.
Yes, you did.
Last month. So and it's part of that is kind of the pump was primed for me to do that to do that interview because I was like, man, I gotta see what these are all about, because if Derek loves them this much, maybe there's something to him.
Or maybe he's just batshit crazy now.
A little from column A, a little from column B.
Oh, I appreciate that, Brian. I really do.
Yeah, it's always such a balance, and Derek does such a great job, because you have to balance the editorials with the breaking news. because, if you want to be able to focus on editorials and things like that, you still got to cover your breaking things, your trailer drops, your big announcements. And it was interesting because like years ago, like, we're talking about like the difficulty of like keeping up with that stuff. Like years ago, like horror sites could easily keep up with the news because it really, you had basically we started in July at a heavy season, and it was July through the end of October. And then you could barely find articles. You had to like scrounge for news to pick up in November and December. And then January was maybe a movie or two, and then waiting again until July. And now it's 24/7 news, and it's on, it's video games, it's comics, it's, streaming. There's so much, you literally cannot cover every single piece of it these days. It's crazy.
And Derek, you talk about me being the unsung hero. Like, that is such a thankless job in terms of like, not in terms of, as an outlet, like everybody appreciates that you do that. But in terms of like the general public, like just keeping that stream of news coming out, like that has to come from somewhere. And people are kind of looking at the news and not necessarily looking at like the man behind the curtain making all that work. Like, meanwhile, like I come in once a month and I'm like, hey, check out this cool interview I did. And then I leave.
Come back here.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like you do the work, man.
Oh,
Derek, what's your article count?
Oh gosh.
It's over. You crossed 10,000.
Yeah, I'm at like 10,600, like 50-ish, somewhere in there right now. So
I was actually thinking about like for mine, and I'm like, man, I've done this for a while. I've done a lot of these, probably with all the different sites. I've got to have between like 100 and 200 articles written by this point.
Well, it's just that continued, I
feel like the sloth at the DMV.
Yeah, but yours are all like, yours are all special features and interviews and retrospectives. So I mean, it's not like I've done over 10,000 of those, but yeah, it's amazing like how much it adds up just kind of doing it for that many years. It's I'm back, like you said, Brian. I'm just kind of cranking the wheel and I'm making the taffy, but it's fun though.
What are you doing back there, man?
'Tis the season, but it's fun though. You never know what's gonna. I mean, sometimes you might have a heads up, like, hey, this trailer's going to drop tomorrow and that kind of thing, but you never really know what's going to happen any given day, and that's the fun of it, and that's why I love what I love about it. And it's amazing. Sometimes I will go back and just look at like stuff from 2014 and be like, oh yeah, that's when that, you see all this coverage for a movie that came out back then, all the excitement that was around it. And so it's definitely fun to kind of cover that stuff, and no two days are the same. That's for sure.
I'm still just stuck on the idea that Derek implied that pulling taffy is associated with the holiday season.
You don't make any Christmas taffy?
I mean, I don't know. It's seasonal taffy.
Sorry, I just saw that in a Hallmark movie, so that's probably why I said it.
How are the chestnuts coming, hon? Good. How's the taffy coming? Good. A couple more pulls here and I'll be in.
Oh, boy. I mean, it goes great with your holiday cheese curds. And you're going to tell me those aren't a thing, too.
Okay, listeners, we're having a contest. We're creating an alternate The Thing cast. And so far, we have Jonathan is Windows. Derek is either going to be Barcart or Taffy. And you listeners need to find names for Brian and I in this new alternate The Thing universe.
Ooh, that will be a fun one.
Yeah.
I can think of a few names.
He's got them ready.
They won't make a lick of sense, but he's got them ready.
Okay. I'm moving over to me. I'm moving over to myself.
Move yourself.
Yeah. So for favorite article, it's interesting because I think some of my favorite experiences, like a lot of it, I went back to like interviews or things like that. And like, I enjoyed interviews or talking with the person, but sometimes like there's a split between like having a really good interview and then it turning into a really good article. Sometimes you're like, yeah, that person was great. And like we got along and like the conversation was good. And like I didn't stutter through anything or wasn't too nervous. And then it was like, but the interview itself, like the article, you didn't get a lot of content. So, I really enjoyed talking with George Romero. And
Who's that?
Roger Corman. But then, in some cases, though, I don't think that those were like super meaty. So I was thinking like I really enjoyed talking with Andrew Lincoln. If you look at like when we started covering Walking Dead and we had like a lot of access before the show like really, really blew up. Like we had yearly interviews for a while or multiple times a year with Andrew Lincoln. It was kind of fun to, if you look at that interview series, to like see he gives really honest and like detailed answers. Like I could ask him, kind of like with us, you ask him 4 questions and it's going to take him, 30 minutes or longer. And so, we were able to kind of talk about a lot of interesting things that some people may shy away from. Like, how did you get into the headspace for this? And he's like, well, I was reading this book and that book and this book, and that informed what I was doing, or I did this kind of workout. And it was like, it was very candid. So I really enjoyed those. Similarly, I think that I had a number of great conversations with Robert Kirkman, who, he likes to joke a lot. So sometimes, if you're at a convention, and he'll play with the audience. And so you may not get like very detailed answers. And I feel like we got that. My favorite article from, recent memory, I guess it was last year, was my set visit for Dr. Sleep. I had a lot of fun on the set visit. And I think in terms of the article, we kind of touched upon a lot of the, interesting elements from like them, talking about what it took to rebuild the Overlook, talking about adapting the material, talking about, what he learned from Hill House. So I had a lot of fun with that, but definitely for me, it's a lot of interviews. I enjoy doing them. Some of them turn out great, some of them not so much, but I think that's where I tend to do a lot of my writing.
I really dig your set visits, but I also really dig because you're kind of you are the head of Daily Dead, but you have these opportunities to be the ambassador too. Like when you go to it, was it the Overlook Festival?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And your coverage from those is always fantastic. Well, that would tie into your Roger Corman interview, correct?
Yeah. That was an Overlook.
See, those are great. Those are great because a lot of us don't get the opportunity to go to those kind of festivals. So to get an inside look, and you really bring a great, passionate fans approach to it, really makes you like go, holy shit, I want to go to that festival. So. Yeah.
I also really appreciate like Jonathan is one of those guys who is always pushing other people, through the site. He's it's your site, but you go to such length to not make it about you. So
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like a special treat when you kind of like come out of the shadows and put out like a new feature, or like when you take part in like, when we're doing like the different holiday stuff or things like that. Like I'm always really happy to see you put out a new piece, just because, you kind of like, you're like a ninja. You come out of nowhere, you throw out like this really great, like you'll throw out like a really great 1,000 to 1,500 words, and then you'll kind of like go back and just kind of like chill out. And that kind of meshes very well with your personality. Like you're so unassuming, but you're just so insightful in the discussions that you have. And I just love how you like sneak up on us with just these like nuggets of gold.
The unassuming ninja.
I will take it, and I appreciate it. So
like,
thank you.
He just kind of like walks out, throws the throwing star at your neck, walks on back in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
You go ahead, Derek.
Not to interrupt you, as I am. Hopefully, I'm going to say something good about you, but I've learned so much working with you, and just seeing how you handle things and how you support other writers and support other viewpoints. It's just been amazing. And it's like, I've learned everything like that I do on a day-to-day basis was from what I learned from you. So it's, I mean, I had a background in this kind of thing from school and all that, but like, I really found like I kind of learned the Daily Dead way when I became a part of this, and learned so much about how to cover stuff, how not to cover stuff, which is kind of just as important in a lot of ways, and how to do it professionally, respectfully. It's just amazing. I feel like it was kind of like you were Qui-Gon Jinn and I was Obi-Wan, or Obi-Wan and Anakin, or something like that. It just felt like I've learned so much, and I'm always learning new stuff from you. So it's been awesome to be a part of that over the years.
I think I'd be okay with Qui-Gon and you as Obi-Wan because I'm okay dying as long as like you go out and you're Obi-Wan. But if I'm Obi-Wan and you become Darth Vader, like that's a lot for me, Derek. Like that means I didn't train you too well.
And that means that I'm gonna like we're gonna have to like face off at some point too.
Yeah, and I'll have to pretend that I missed.
It's over, Derek. I have the news traffic. I have the Twitter followers.
Close enough.
We'll make it work. Okay, well, thank you very much, you guys, and thank you, Brianna. And we're gonna move on to our next question, which comes from Tracy, who asks, can the Corpse Club give books some more love? What are you all reading?
No, next question.
Oh, snap. Don't you dare. I've been waiting for this question for years.
I knew it. I was like, oh, this is going to be a good one
Hey,
for Derek.
Brian, spoiler alert, Spot runs.
Oh, you monster.
I didn't see it.
Oh, that's in my to read pile. Come on.
Oh, sorry, Derek.
It reminds me of that Stephen Wright joke where he's just like, I was reading the dictionary the other day. Turns out the zebra did it.
Oh, that's good stuff.
That is.
Well, Brian,
So
would you like to kick us off on, unless you want to skip this one?
Oh, so you're taking over hosting duties from Jonathan?
Yeah, well, I was like,
juncture?
well, I mean, he can jump in. That's fine.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
I think we had
forgot.
more from Scott. I thought
my wires got crossed. I remembered last episode, Brian started us off. This episode, Scott's kicking us off.
Yeah, he is.
Sorry, Scott.
Why don't you let Jonathan host, Eric? He's been doing a fine job so far.
I give it over to you, sir.
It's once he realized he's, Obi-Wan or Anakin, now he's
Yeah,
trying to take over.
Cut your ass down.
Yeah. So, Scott, you reading anything?
I actually just picked up the latest issue of Rue Morgue magazine, Canada's own.
Very exciting.
Yes, and some guy named Bryan Christopher has a nice juicy article in there.
It's
Not
a little
jealous
nugget.
at
It's
all.
not bad.
It's great. It's awesome.
I think it's
So
got real
as far
cold
as,
in here.
as far as as far as books go, I like to dip into Hunter S. Thompson stuff from time to time, especially his I love Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But I also like reading his political stuff from the Nixon administration and the election. It's just really great political stuff that kind of, applies as much to today as it did back then. I mean, politics are politics. I'm just a huge fan of his writing and his writing style. And I've had a real hankering lately for some Kurt Vonnegut, who I haven't read in a long time, but man, do I love me some Kurt Vonnegut.
I have had Slaughterhouse 5 on my shelf for years, and I still haven't read it. So are you saying I should pick that one up?
You know what? I've actually never read Slaughterhouse 5. But Breakfast of Champions is amazing. So many fantastic books. I haven't read a Vonnegut book that I didn't like. So
Q.
And what about, have you read, he wrote Hocus Pocus, I believe?
Yes.
And I remember, I looked up, I was like, oh, is that like the novelization of the movie? And I'm like, oh, it's actually a classic. Okay. Guess I'll have to,
Kurt Vonnegut having a side hustle doing novelization of early Disney movies.
There's some good money in that.
That would be an interesting take, though. I would love to see his take on Hocus Pocus, the movie.
He actually did the screenplay for the upcoming revival or sequel or whatever's coming out.
Directed by Kenny Ortega, novelization by Kurt Vonnegut.
Hello. See, it's got a nice ring to it, I think. Oh, yeah, that is awesome. I do want to read Hunter S. Thompson at some point. I've never gotten around to his work, but I've read a lot of people that have been influenced by him, and I think. Oh,
sorry, just to add to your Hunter S. Thompson pile, Hell's Angels is an amazing book. He actually rode around and got into the Angels Club for a year before he finally got kicked out, and they kicked the shit out of him.
Yeah, I did read that one a while back.
Yeah, that's a terrific book. So he's got different like eras of his writing. He was more hardcore journalistic and a little drier earlier, and then when he got into his Fear and Loathing period, it became a little more loosey goosey, a little more straight up entertaining. His gonzo journalism, where he puts himself into the story, he becomes part of the story, and I always just really liked that about his writing. I just thought he was a terrific writer. So yeah, those are the things that I'm wanting to read, Tracy, but haven't got around to it. But I will, I promise.
And how about you, Brian?
So here is the level of masochism I'm working through. I'm reading a book, and I'm also listening to another one on as an audio book. I am reading Stephen King's The Stand.
Ooh, nice.
I'm reading a 1,000+ book about a deadly plague. And
I'm like the present.
And I'm listening to The Fireman by Joe Hill, Keeping It in the Family, another epic book about a worldwide plague. So yeah, the Stand for most people I'm sure know, it's about this super flu called Captain Trips that wipes out 99% of the population. People that are left are kind of congregating around either kind of the good group with this. Oh God, I can't remember her name. I remember she was played by Ruby Dee. I haven't gotten to her character yet in the book.
Mother Abigail, yes.
So we've got kind of your good characters gathering around Mother Abigail, and we've got your not so savory characters gathering in Las Vegas around Randall Flagg. So it just kind of turned into this epic, battle between good and evil. At least I assume, based off of the miniseries and as far as I've gotten in the book. But I don't know. There's some kind of weird cathartic release about like at least what we're going through isn't as bad as what's going on in this book, because what we're going through really sucks. So I don't know. There's something about like, well, it could be worse. And The Fireman is similar, where but instead of a flu, it is this kind of very fictionalized illness. It's this spore that will spread, and eventually it will cause people to spontaneously combust. And so it's kind of down to this woman who she's with. Her name is Harper, and she's got this husband, Jacob, and they're they've got this initial plan that Jacob wants to do, or when they find out that this is going on, he says like, oh, it's selfish to live like this. We could give it to other people. Let's just kind of end it ourselves. And then she gets pregnant. And so she has it. She gets pregnant and she doesn't want to, she wants to try and have the baby. And so just all the conflict that ensues from that. And the titular fireman is this kind of very, what's the word? Eccentric, bordering on dangerous guy who seems to be able to, he's got the illness, but he seems to be able to keep it under control in certain ways. I'm only probably about a fourth of the way into both books. So I'm more familiar kind of with the broad strokes of The Stand, but I really don't know where the fireman's going to go. So I'm interested to see where that goes. What I really enjoy about The Fireman is that it's narrated by Kate Mulgrew, who, if there's any Star Trek fans out there, you might know as Captain Janeway from Star Trek Voyager. And she's got a really, really good reading voice. She actually does all of Joe Hill's books. So if you're interested in those books and you are a Star Trek fan, bring those together. And the Audible versions of those books are ones that you'll probably dig.
Out of curiosity, are you reading the unabridged version of The Stand?
I am indeed.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's the only version that I've read too, and I'd like to reread the book, but I'm thinking of going back and reading the original version as it came out.
I guess that was like 700 plus.
The shorter version.
Yeah,
the shorter version.
And I think he was allowed to make some changes too, story-wise, so I'd be curious what the original cut is like, because I too have only read the unabridged version, and I'd really be interested, because I always forget how early that book came out, in his career, because I always think of the early 90s unabridged version, and I'm like, oh wait, it actually came out over 10 years before that came out.
Yeah.
So I would love to see what that looks like.
I can't remember which one I read. I think I read the original, but obviously if that was the case, I didn't read the extended cut, so I have no idea what the difference is.
I guess I'm trying to cap off my year of this has been my year of Stephen King epics, because I did It in January. So I'm going to try and see if I can get through his second big one before the year is out.
And you know what? Just real quick, since we're throwing out books and authors, Tracy, Bentley Little. If you haven't read any Bentley Little, he's one of my favorite horror authors. He's compulsively readable. You open the page and you can't stop. And his stories are are wild. They're just wild. One of my favorite books of his is The Mailman. Which, speaking of Stephen King is a big fan of Bentley Little's as well, and he loves The Mailman. And it's just this wild, I can't even describe it. It's this wild story about this malevolent mailman who comes to this town and kind of decimates the town. It's really weird and really wonderfully written. So Bentley Little, and I apologize for the intrusion.
I'm glad that you mentioned Bentley Little, because that would be one that I read recently. It seems like 10 years ago, but it was at the beginning, kind of right before COVID hit. And that was The Resort, which was one of his more recent ones. I think it came out in 2004, but man, it's so good. And it kind of the best way to describe it is if there was a book that was set at the Overlook Hotel, but it was back when the Overlook was open and there was people there. And if you saw weird stuff that was happening there while the hotel was full, that's what this book feels like. And it's so creepy, and it's out in the middle of the desert. And so it's very isolated, but there's a bunch of people there, and just weird stuff happens all in the swimming pool, in the hotel rooms. It's psychological, but it's also a lot of a little more splattery horror too at times. So it just runs the gamut. It's so much fun. So I'm with you on the Bentley Little train, although I have a lot of catching up to do with him. He kind of reminds me of Richard Lehman. It feels a little bit Some of his stories are very cinematic and almost like a slasher story in some respects, where it feels like you're watching like an 80s movie come to life, which I really enjoy.
I have never laid with the layman. I've never read one of his.
That's one way to put it.
That's literary lingo. I don't mean to get too technical.
I would say the Traveling Vampire Show, which he wrote shortly before he unfortunately passed away from a heart attack. But he wrote that. That was one of his last books, and I'd say it's one of my favorite books of all time. It really takes place in the 60s, and it's like this traveling vampires coming to town. It kind of feels like something Wicked This Way comes. I would definitely recommend that. I think it's one of his more accessible books, because I know he can be some of his horror can get a little extreme at times, but I think that one's really accessible and more of like a coming of age kind of the body story. So that you could put that one in your nightstand. On the to read pile.
Sounded threatening.
A little bit.
You're gonna put it on your nightstand, okay?
it puts it on the nightstand, or it's against the hose again.
That's right.
But Brian, you mentioned Stephen King, and I just finished reading a Stephen King book for the first time. Not my first Stephen King book, but
no shame.
It took me a while to kind of build up to the King. But I was reading Dr. Sleep, and I had read like 150 pages back in like the fall of 2019, and then I saw Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep in theaters, and then I didn't really like feel like going back and reading it after that, just because I love the movie, but I was kind of like, well, I kind of know what's going to happen. And so I kind of went on to other stuff, and I finally came back to it and finished reading it. And I almost feel a little weird saying this, but it's one of those rare cases where I actually prefer the movie over the book. And I don't, especially, I feel blasphemous saying that. I'll probably burst into flames, and I still love Stephen King, but I feel like Flanagan like took parts of that story and just really fleshed it out and tied it into the Shining mythology in an even more impactful way in a lot of ways. And the pacing of it just feels, even though it's a really long movie, I feel like the pacing, he really nailed that as well. But so that was one I still really enjoyed the book, and I feel like you get inside the head of Danny Torrance a little more in the book, and I think King probably does a better job in that regard as far as like the AA stuff. But it's a book, you get more time to spend with the characters. So that was one I finally got around to finishing, and I also dusted off my stack of Christopher Pike paperbacks, and I've kind of gotten back into collecting like YA horror from the 80s and 90s. So I've been buying a bunch of Christopher Pike books to kind of add to my collection. And one that I had never read before.
No, you just got flagged again by the FBI. Keep going.
Well, that's where it's all. It's
going in your Stein file.
I might burst into flames saying this too, but it'd been a long time since I'd read anything from Pike, and Mike Flanagan's doing the Christopher Pike series for I believe it's Netflix coming up here. So I'm like, I better brush up on this. And I know Pike was always known for getting weirder and darker than R.L. Stine. And holy crap, was I not prepared for what that book had. I mean, it had everything from Vietnam flashbacks to cannibal space vampires to like really trippy psychedelic psychosexual like bloodthirsty dreams. It was like I mean I remembered that he always went a little bit out there, but holy crap, was this like I'm like, really, this was for teenagers. Okay, I'm amazed by that. So now I need to like gobble up the rest of those books and see what else is waiting there.
So one thing I'd recommend is you're getting back into Christopher Pike. I've never actually read any Christopher Pike. I do kind of want to, based off what you're saying, and also there's a really great show. It's called Teen Creeps
I've heard of this.
It's really good. It's these two podcasters, Kelly Nugent and Lindsay Kaitai. They basically just run through a bunch of like pulpy YA fiction. So they've done just about every Christopher Pike book at this point, if not all of them, like a good percentage of them. And they just do like a deep dive into each one, which is pretty wild because they come out every week, which means like they're plowing through, like they're reading one of these a week. Yeah. But it's really funny. They kind of like the best is kind of when they dive into like the mind of a teenage girl as depicted by like a middle-aged man is usually pretty funny.
Yeah. I could see how that would be a thing. Yeah.
Especially when they're talking about Pike's early stuff, which they as they describe it was pretty rough. Like he kind of, really came into his own and became a better writer. Again, this is all based off of, I've not read a word of his stuff, but based off of the way they've described it, like he's improved quite a bit since when he first started.
Oh, that is good. Yeah, I haven't read like some of the 80s stuff that he did, but I'll have to check that out. And the podcast as well. I remember hearing about that, and I remember like kind of bookmarking that, but I need to go back and listen to those because it'd be fun to read the books and then listen to their reactions to them, especially from that perspective. I think would be really neat.
Teen Creep was Derek's MySpace account.
That was the first thing that got him flagged by the FBI.
That's right.
And we do, Derek, have to talk about Dr. Sleep, but not on this podcast because I don't want to spoil anything.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's just because I want to talk about it. So
okay.
You didn't say anything wrong.
Oh, I thought, man, I really did get flagged.
Yeah. You can't say what you just said. You cannot say that the movie was better than the book. But no, I'm just, I don't want to talk spoilers. So I'll just leave it at that. Mm-hmm. For me, I have not read any novels because I read comic books. That's what I read.
Hey, that's not allowed in English class.
But that's what I do. That's what I do. So
They're
I've been
graphic
reading
novels.
At work. That's a easy way to sell them to adults. But I read comics, collected edition comics in some cases.
You, man, own it. I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been reading a lot of comic books. I've been reading The Immortal Hulk. It's a new Hulk series. It's been around for a couple of years, and it treats the Hulk and Bruce Banner more like it's more like a horror story. It's if Bruce Banner dies, he comes back at night as the Hulk. And so it's very much like a werewolf story. And then he's responsible for creating other monsters. There's body horror. There's so many great things about it. And I hate spoiling, especially because I know so many people listening to this probably haven't checked it out. So yeah, if you're looking for something, it's pretty self-contained. I think you can get the first volume and, first 2 volumes for $20 and get, most of the story that you need. So, you don't need to have known any of the details, before, which is nice. It's basically a reboot point. Everybody thinks the Hulk is dead. Well, surprise, he's back. And that's basically all you need to know, to get into this. And they even explain it in the first issue. So, the Immortal Hulk is probably some of the coolest stuff I've seen with the Hulk in a while. So I've been reading that and a little behind on it, but I'll be catching up. And then I've been reading. You go ahead. Has
that run concluded or is that still ongoing?
No, it's still ongoing. So yeah, it hasn't concluded yet. And, I guess based on how well it's been doing, I think they'll keep going with it, but I'm not 100% on that.
So it's not designed as like a closed story. Like it's an ongoing series.
Yeah, but I mean, they usually do it in like 6 to 10 issue arcs or 6 to 12 issue arcs. So, you could probably jump in for like the first couple arcs and then bounce out if you feel like you got what you needed.
Gotcha.
And that's the case really for a lot of like the Marvel and DC comics. Like they're never going to end them outright. And so, it's kind of like jump off when it, when it feels like the right time. But yeah, I've been reading, I think I talked before about what they've been doing with the new X-Men. The new X-Men series from Jonathan Hickman's just really interesting because they like really leaned into the sci-fi. So, more time travel. They now I can't remember if we talked about this, but now like the X-Men are essentially unkillable because they figured out how to clone them and like back up their consciousness. So like now they're killing off X-Men pretty regularly, but they use it they bring them back anyway a few years like back in the day, but now they actually used a mechanism to bring them back. There's a lot of cool stuff there. So if you start with, what is it? Powers of X and House of X, or Powers of 10 and House of X. I think that's where it starts. But anyway, if you just type in Jonathan Hickman and just start with his X-Men run, that's only been around for like the last 6 months or a year. That's really good.
Nice.
Tom King just kicked off a new Batman miniseries with Batman and Catwoman that spans, multiple timelines. And it takes place in the same universe, but it's just like them at, we'll say 30, them at, 50, and then there's another time as well that we're still learning about, but that's good. And yeah, I've just been trying to catch up on as many comics as I have. Been reading, other graphic novels as well, standalones. If you're looking for horror, Infidel from Image Comics is really good. There's so many great comics. So, if you think you're running out of content, I don't know how you can be running out of content with everything that's coming streaming these days, but don't forget about your comic books because there are tons of great comic books. And, also, I will also say, a lot of comic book stores are struggling. So if you got a local comic book shop, see what you can do to, pick up a graphic novel. Maybe it's been a little bit, but, like I said, support your local businesses. Those are definitely ones that are struggling.
Have you hugged a comic book today?
You definitely should.
You should.
Oh, and
Amen.
this is almost a perfect segue, and I'm even just going to call it out because at my comic book shop, one of the unfortunately it's closed now, and not due to COVID. It's just the guy ended up retiring, but it was always a split comic book shop, and to stay open, it'd be half comics and half like flavor of the year. So during the Beanie Baby craze, he sold Beanie Babies, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic cards, and he sold Pogs.
Oh, no.
Oh, nice.
And he sold Pogs. and
a Pog would be something from...
Well, yeah,
Current times?
not everybody knows what a Pog is, and we were talking before our episode, and Scott doesn't know what Pogs are, and I was like,
Scotty doesn't know.
Scotty doesn't know, so we're going to talk about it a little bit here. What happened
This
is
our segment called Scotty Doesn't Know.
I know what a Pog is.
well, Brian, why don't you tell us about Pogs?
Oh boy. Okay. So yeah, I think that is a good way to introduce it, kind of that fad of the year kind of thing, because I don't think it lasted much longer than that. But it was this game that got big. I think I was probably around between 10 and 11 around when this came out, and it's this collectible kind of, not card, but it's like these little cardboard discs, and these are the Pogs. And it's kind of this this offshoot of marbles, where you'll have this stash of Pogs, and kind of the collectible element of it is that you can get ones with all these different kind of designs on it. Like some are just general, like cool, freaky designs. You might get ones that have like, those hologram things that kind of look like some of the different like variant, like comic book covers that you'd see, where if you turn it, it like kind of shifts what you're looking at. You could get stuff with like different pop culture stuff on there. But the idea was that like you would have these cardboard discs, and then you would have this thing called a slammer, which would either be like a plexiglass disc, sometimes they were metal, but the idea was, it was very simple. You took turns and just tried to throw the slammer at the Pogs and get them to turn over. And any of the ones that you flipped over, you won and got to keep. So it was kind of this thing where like, it was like with marbles, where like you would just kind of, you would go into a game and come out with all these different kinds of Pogs that you didn't have before. And you could like, quote unquote, impress your friends by having a really cool slammer. Like I, for instance, took it a step further, and I had a really far out plexiglass slammer that had been converted into a necklace. Whoa, stay back, ladies. I'm married. So yeah,
major cred right there.
I got a little too into Pogs. And probably glad that fad came and went fairly quickly, so that then I could go running full speed into Magic the Gathering.
So do you still play? Hold on. Well, let's talk Magic the Gathering in a minute. I got to go back to the Slammer, and then I'll go back. I left a mental note. So what was in your Slammer? Because I remember that they used to have, and I didn't play Pogs. I was a little late for the Pog craze, although I did occasionally.
My sister the same age.
I don't know how to answer that.
You were upstate more.
You guys suck.
I don't know how to answer that. Sorry. Maybe it just hit New York at a different time. I'm just gonna go with.
I was 17 years old when I was playing Pogs. Okay.
So anyway, my sister played Pogs and collected them. So I would occasionally like if she had some extra she wanted to play, I would play with her. But really, her and her friends played, and she had like all the cases with the Pogs in it, and she had all these different slammers. And I remember they'd have like a scorpion embedded into some of them or a design. So in this one you had as a necklace, was there anything inside of the slammer?
I think there might have been like a yin yang kind of a theme to it.
Those were popular.
Yeah. Kind of vaguely appropriate-y and just stupid. That's what I remember it being.
So if someone saw you wearing that, they knew right away, that guy's a Pog master right there. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. No, actually, I feel like wearing the Pog Slammer necklace was akin to like being the guy in high school that walked around with a Letterman jacket, but you didn't have a varsity letter.
But it's comfortable. So soft on the inside.
Could you back up the necklace though? Like, were you good at playing Pog?
To be honest, I don't remember. Like, could you really be good at playing Pogs? It was literally throwing discs at other discs. Like, there wasn't much to it.
I'm not going to do it now, but if we YouTubed it, there'd be like guy who used a slammer on like 1,000 Pogs. Like, I mean, so I'm sure there were some people who are much better than others.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say I.
There's a ringing endorsement for the game. It's the game where some people are much better than others.
There's a reason this didn't last very long.
Yeah.
The gritty underworld of Pogs.
Oh, I remember they had Pog. They had, like how they had the folders for like baseball cards or collectible cards where they had they had those for Pogs. I remember now they were like the little disc holders and you could just flip page after page, because I remember my sister would be like, I want this Pog or this slammer. Oh, it's coming back.
I always just think about that Simpsons quote where Milhouse is all excited because he's like, remember Alf? He's back in Pog form, and he's just got all these Alf Pogs.
That's right.
Oh, good old Pogs. Well, here's the thing, Corpse Club listeners. If you have no idea what a Pog is, it's not too late. I mean, I believe that kind of like the Beanie Baby market, that the market for Pogs is at a all-time low. So you can probably eBay your own Pog set, and I'm not making any money off of this. You can eBay your own Pog set for a very small amount of money. And honestly, what I should have done was use this to sell my sister's Pogs, because I think she just threw them out the other day when she was cleaning stuff out of the house, and the Pogs and the Slammers, and I could have given them to you, Brian.
As enticing as it sounds, I think I'm going to pass on the Pog renaissance. And
one thing I want to be perfectly clear about, like, I'm not being into nerdy shit is nothing to be ashamed of. Pogs, it's not that they were nerdy. It was kind of dumb. Like Magic the Gathering, I will defend that. I would be playing that today if we weren't in a pandemic. Like, I'm in a new city, so I don't really know anybody who plays, but like I'm fully intending on when things open up again. trying to find some groups that play Magic because I still love that game. And I'm currently playing some different role-playing games through some different virtual platforms. So like nerded up, but there was a reason Pogs came and went. It's because that it wasn't a game that really stood the test of time.
I didn't know you played Magic the Gathering. And so, yeah, now I'm excited. We should, I haven't played the online edition.
You can play virtually. I wouldn't even know how that works. So
yeah, they released, I just don't know how, there's like a collectible element to it. I know you have to buy some of it, but like Christy and I did pick up some new sets. What we do is usually when they do like the new expansions, we'll get like the pre-made decks and stuff like that so we can play. We don't play that often, but I miss it. I used to play a lot when I was younger. I mean,
honestly, it's been a couple years just because like I haven't had anyone in my circle of friends that's like, oh yes, let's play Magic the Gathering. So I'm definitely looking for people who want to play again. But if there's that virtual element, definitely want to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, you should investigate that. I believe it's just called Magic the Gathering Arena, and I haven't tried it. I played like a computer game. Wow, that sounds ancient. I played an Xbox game version.
Was it on like a floppy disk or?
Basically. But I played an Xbox version like 5 or 6 years ago where you kind of played against AI, and that was fine. But I'd rather play against people. But yeah, I used to love that. And there's they've added new rules, but the basic concept of the game is still so great. I mean, if for people who played Pokemon or anything like that, it's relatively the same, maybe a little more complex. And if you play Pokemon, you're like, no, Pokemon's more complex. Like, I'm not going to argue with you. I don't play Pokemon that much, and I have nothing against it. It's just Magic the Gathering was what we played.
Yeah. A very quick thing. Oh, sorry. Unless you had more about Magic.
No, go ahead.
Just to kind of like splash in some horror again. I want to report back when we kind of have one of these kind of free sessions again. But one of the RPG groups I'm in, they're hinting at they're going to start doing some one-shot versions of a role-playing version of Alien. So like set in the Alien and Xenomorph universe. I am so excited to try playing that. So I definitely plan on, like, once I play that for the first time, I want to report back here just to see if I can give people a sense for what that's all about.
Well, when Jonathan wakes up from fainting, you can tell him about it.
I do know. Yeah, I do know about. I don't know if it's the new, or is it the new role playing game they released maybe like a year ago, and they just released an expansion for it?
I think so. Yeah, the guy said he's still trying to like kind of figure out the ins and outs of it. So yeah, I think it's that recent release.
Yeah. Well, if enough people know how to play in our circle, I'm always down, of course.
And the whole game is you work as a cubicle worker at the Wayland Yutani Corporation.
There you go. I could do that. Yeah, we're actually
like you're
doing
kind of
like
screwing over the party from like your remote desk and just like doing everything you can to make sure they don't survive.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're the one sending messages to the Nostromo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am doing like a D&D I guess variant that's like Edgar Allan Poe based. So I'm going to be doing that this Sunday. So we'll see how that goes. But it's just a one-off, and
I was invited. Friendship over.
Sorry.
Oh, terminated.
We have to send each other in some cases like a list of interests which have not been mentioned on Corpse Club.
Well, that's why when we went down this road, I'm like, oh, we never talk about this stuff. Let's talk about all of it right now.
Yes.
Like Pogs.
That's why I was like, I was willing to slog through the Pog discussion to get to the other end of it, to the good stuff.
Yep. Okay, well, we have one final question. We got it from Geo. And Geo asks, what horror movie would you show to someone that hasn't seen or doesn't like horror movies? So maybe they haven't seen any horror movies, and they want to know, what movie they should start with, or maybe they just don't like them. What would you show to try to convince them that horror movies are worth watching? And then Scott, we'll start with you again.
I'm not even sure you can convince someone who doesn't like horror movies necessarily. It's hard to convert. It's hard to force someone to like horror. You kind of have to come to it. Having said that, starting out, as many of us have, we started young. So it was kind of, when you start young, it's kind of whatever's around you is what you're ingesting. So for me at 6, it was Burnt Offerings, and there was a TV horror was very prolific in the 70s. So I ingested a lot of that. I think your entry point, there's a couple factors. How old are you? If you're just coming to horror now. So, that increases a lot of criteria in the sense that, okay, you can watch more adult material. You don't have to start off with something softer necessarily. If it's a person of a soft, I don't want to say soft, a delicate disposition, then I would say, something that was PG rated horror is good to start. If you're looking for something modern day, I think the Conjuring films, the Insidious films, are really good modern day examples of classical horror, character driven with sudden bursts of suspense, etc. So again, it's a question that I guess that can be taken from so many angles, right? There's so many variables in there. But I think a safe bet, if it's something, show them a modern day horror movie that has classical sensibilities, like The Conjuring, like Insidious, basically, stuff from the James Wan universe, I think, because they really do nod to the past while still staying in the present.
I like that. I think, it's good to have a mixture, because it really depends on who you're showing it to and what age they are, what their sensibilities are. So I think you kind of have to have like a whole treasure trove ready to go.
Yeah. And, you go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. I guess I'm looking at it from, I'm going to make the assumption, and I think this is a 2-part, because it would be a different movie for if it was someone who doesn't just normally watch horror versus someone who just doesn't like horror. Someone who just might not be super familiar with the genre for whatever reason, not necessarily that they're against it. I'm going to assume, because like you said, Scott, there's so many variables. So the assumption I'm going to make is that this is an adult or someone who can see an R-rated movie, someone who isn't necessarily squeamish, just for whatever reason hasn't gravitated to horror. So I think kind of the best entry point for me for that kind of a person would be Return of the Living Dead. And because I think that's a movie that brings so many different elements that make horror what it is into one movie. It's distilled 80s. And for a lot of us, horror in the 80s are almost inextricably linked with for a lot of people. There is obviously there's a comedic element to it. But it's not too over the board funny, because it is also legitimately scary. There's also a nihilistic bent to it, just with the way it ends. Everybody kind of dies. It's kind of given the middle finger to the military and kind of any form of authority. There's a very kind of punk rock element to it. Frankly, it also has the sleaze factor. Linnea Quigley spends half of her screen time naked in it. So it's just kind of got without being without slipping into being mindless and stupid, it's kind of got all the fun elements and all the expected elements of a horror movie, and done really well. So I think that's what I would show someone who just hasn't seen much horror or any horror. For someone who doesn't like horror, I'm going to make the assumption that they don't like horror because they're conflating horror and slashers. So, they don't like the quote unquote, the dumb topless blonde getting hacked to bits by a homicidal maniac. So I want to show them something that's going to perhaps open their minds as to what horror can be. And with that, I'm going to show them Karen Kusama's The Invitation. This is a movie that is extremely horrific, and the turns it takes. Like I think it would be hard to argue that it's not a horror movie, but it's also a movie that is just really leans into the dramatic elements of it, and it's not a campy slasher movie. It's not sleazy. It's not over the top. All of which can be terribly fun, or things that I really enjoy in a horror movie. But if someone that's not their cup of tea, I want to make sure that they know that that's not all horror can be. And I think The Invitation is a really good example of that.
Yeah, we screened that at our Scary Movie Marathon with our friends last year, and that was definitely a fun one to watch, especially with a group of people, because it's that whole atmosphere of like, what's really going on? That's so much fun to watch throughout. Yeah, that's see, and you're right. You almost have to like divide it into different categories, because people are coming at it from different, like if they like horror or they don't like horror, you're trying to convince them one way or the other. I think for me, I feel like if you really don't like horror and you feel like you've seen everything there is and you're just looking for something different, I would say The Cabin in the Woods would be a good one, just because if you don't like horror, this takes everything about horror and kind of deconstructs it and kind of parodies it in a way, but still has a lot of fun with horror, and maybe will even convert you into being a horror fan by the time it's all said and done, because I think it really shows, like, anyone who thinks, okay, I know exactly what to expect from a horror movie, that movie will kind of turn that thought upside down. And I think it works so well on so many different levels, and it's so clever, and I think it's the perfect antidote for anyone who's just ready to quit the genre. I think it's respectful enough, but also pokes fun at it enough where you can have fun with it from both sides. And I would say that would be my go-to movie for someone who's just tired of the genre for whatever reason. If you're looking, anybody have any thoughts on the Cabin in the Woods pick?
Well, I was just going to say that I thought you were going to pick Mr. Boogedy, and you didn't, and I'm a little disappointed, frankly.
Well, if you have Disney Plus, then let's talk Mr. Boogedy.
Or if you're leeching it off of your 11-year-old cousin.
That's besides the point. Let's not get into particulars here. So anyway, if you're looking for, I guess if you do enjoy horror, but it's like you're going to be your first horror movie ever, and you can watch an R-rated movie, I would say you're going to want that humor in there. I think that's definitely a key element for someone kind of coming into the genre. Shaun of the Dead, I think, is a great movie for that. I think it's the perfect, like, you can watch that movie and appreciate it, and it's still kind of scary, but it's got so much humor in it, and you get such an appreciation of the zombie genre from that one. So I definitely think that would be a fun one. And also Scream. I feel like Scream has a really good balance, maybe some of the best balance ever of horror and humor, and it's still really damn scary, but I feel like it pulls away enough where it gives it to you in small enough doses throughout where you can kind of recover, and then it goes back into it. And it's such a great horror encyclopedia of referencing all these movies. Even back in 1996, we've had so many horror movies since then, but it's like, it's such a great gateway drug, I think, into horror. And I think it's just as much a celebration of horror fans as it is something that you can kind of just get into the genre with. So that would be a good one, I think, as well. And if you're a younger viewer, I think you can't go wrong with Halloween Town and Under Wraps and those great DComs from yesteryear. And like Scott said, maybe put on Mr. Boogedy and Boogie.
Why not?
So yeah, there's about 100 movies for you to choose from. But yeah, I think you have a lot of options, but it really depends on the person.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I looked at this question and thought about it, I think the big thing is, and I think this goes back to what was mentioned earlier. People have a very the average person has a narrow viewpoint for what horror is, and I've had many discussions with people who are like, that's not horror, this is not horror. And it's okay if we cast a wide net. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, with horror being the bigger classification, as I always say, like something can be a thriller, it can be horror, it can be both. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the big thing is to, let people know that, you can watch a horror movie and it doesn't have to traumatize you. You can watch a horror movie, it doesn't have to have anything gratuitous. And so, for someone that doesn't really, quote unquote, like horror movies, I would say let's try to show you some different things, which maybe you'd consider thriller. Let's see if you like those. Maybe you do like what we are calling horror movies, but you just call them thrillers. And so, to come to mind, like, Get Out and Hush, right? Mm-hmm. Ready or Not, I've shown to a few people, and people love that movie. And, if you're like, that's not a horror movie, like that's fine. But, I think I would show people movies like that. Happy Death Day, Freaky, which just came out, is a great movie to watch. And, so I would suggest that to people who are watching movies now is maybe let's, pick something which maybe isn't, doesn't focus on scares as much. And, can show them that, it is maybe not what they thought horror was, and you can have fun watching it, or you can be at the edge of your seat, but maybe, you go to sleep and you're not scared, or it's not causing you to jump, or it's not traumatizing you in other ways. And I think that'll kind of like lead into, okay, well, I can watch these types of movies, and maybe I don't like these types of movies. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that's a horror fan that's like, I like every single thing equally. Like, there's always like, well, I like these movies, but these, I'm still trying to get into. For a lot of people, Italian horror is something that's an acquired taste. And that even for seasoned horror fans. So, anyway, so yeah, I would start definitely, like I said, and I know a lot of our younger, we have a lot of younger readers and listeners, and, some people don't like watching the older movies. I know I've suggested Universal Monsters. I always like to recommend that kind of stuff as well. I think it's a good foundation for someone that's younger. They can start with that, and then they'll, kind of work their way up. But for someone who's like, who doesn't like older movies, and it's like, I need something that's fast paced, it looks new. Yeah, those are some picks, and there's more. You can reach out anytime, and we'll be happy to suggest.
And I can't tell you how many times I'll be talking to someone about, what I do and Daily Dead, and we'll talk about horror. And a lot of times people will say, well, I like horror. And then they'll kind of pause, and then they'll say, well, I just don't like the really bloody horror. Like, they like the tension, they like the atmosphere, but they don't want like the gore and a lot of the stuff, that was so popular in the early 2000s when it was a lot of gore in the films and the remakes and that kind of thing. And I love those movies too, but I'm like, okay, so I almost feel like there should be like a bloodless collection on Shudder or something like that, where it's movies where it's more about the atmosphere. And I feel like a lot of people are more accessible to that, and then maybe they become a gore hound eventually.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's just understanding that, like I said, horror covers a wide number of subgenres, and you don't have to like them all. But yeah, great question.
Indeed.
And that's it. That's it. We made it through.
The bag is
2
empty.
episodes.
No
The bag is empty for now. So, thank you very much to all of our listeners who submitted questions. In this round, we had Brianna, and we had Tracy, and Jordan, and Gio. So thank you very much. And, we'll do another round of these. It may be a little bit. I think it had been a long time since we did the last one, but we'll try to do these a little more frequently.
For the other 1,000 of you who we didn't get to, we apologize. We'll get to you next time.
Yes, we might have to do a lightning round and just get through a lot. But anyway, we want to thank Bryan, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode. And as always, we want to thank our listeners, including those of you who've signed up for a Corpse Club membership. Visit corpseclub.com. You can learn more about our membership options. You can suggest episode topics, get a Corpse Club t-shirt, and more. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Every rating and review really helps. So if you haven't had a chance to rate and review us, please do. You can find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. If you want to get in touch, you can reach out anytime at contact@corpseclub.com, or on Twitter, we're at Daily Dead News, we're at Corpse Club, and on Instagram and Facebook, we're under Corpse Club as well. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay scary.